Pleasant good day to you all. I am Pastor Moses Marsh, the Associate Pastor of Dikayoma Ministries International. Thank you for joining me for another broadcast in the series, How to Study the Bible. This is the 10th broadcast in this series. And in today's video, I would like to explore something that is very, very crucial where Bible study is concerned. And that is the temptation to harmonize the Gospels. What am I talking about? If you are a careful reader of the Gospels, and by the Gospels I am referring to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. If you're a careful reader of the Gospels, you will recognize that you will see a story or an event or a teaching in the book of Matthew. You'll see that same story or event or teaching in Mark. You'll see it in Luke, and sometimes you may see it in John. And as you read through carefully, you will recognize that at times there may be some differences. So you have the same event in Matthew, but when you compare it to Mark, when you compare it to Luke's version of the same event, there may be some differences. And oftentimes what we have learned is that, we should seek to harmonize these differences. And so we harmonize the Gospels. However, that is not a correct approach to Bible study. Why? We have to remember that though we today have the Bible as a book, and we often think of the Bible as one book, we have to realize that originally it was not so. And so when Matthew wrote his gospel, it was written as a single unit on its own scroll, and it was circulated on its own scroll. It was written to a particular community of believers. Mark wrote his, and it was an independent unit on its own scroll, and it was sent to a different community of believers. Same with Luke, same with John. All right? So Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, these were different books written on separate scrolls sent to different community of believers, sent to a different set of Christians. So, in order for us to understand the Gospels properly, we need to treat them as separate units, as an independent unit. Because when Matthew wrote with a particular intention, different from the intention of Mark, different from the intention of Luke, different from the intention of John. And so, although they may record same events, their intent was different, their emphasis was different. And oftentimes, the theological point that they wanted to convey was also different. And so when we seek to harmonize the Gospels, what we do is that we lose the intent of the author. We lose that particular emphasis that particular author wanted to make. All right, we lose the particular theological point that particular author wanted to make. We lose all of that when we seek to harmonize the Gospels. Now, There are many cases of these events that have slight differences with different emphases in the Gospels. However, I have chosen one to illustrate this point, the point of not harmonizing the Gospels. Very important point. And the passage that I'm going to look at is Matthew chapter 24, a well-known passage. In this passage, Jesus' attention was brought to the temple. Jesus identified that the temple would be destroyed. The disciples asked him, what is the sign? When will this happen? What will be the sign of your coming? And so we know in St. Matthew chapter 24, it identifies a lot of things that will happen in the end times. And one aspect, Jesus dealt specifically with the destruction of the temple. Now I'm just going to pick up that section where it speaks specifically to the destruction of the temple, which occurred in AD 70. So Matthew 24 from verse 15 through to 21. It says, Jesus is speaking, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in winter or on the Sabbath. Verse 21, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. And so here Jesus is predicting the destruction of the temple at Jerusalem, which occurred in AD 70. And one of the points that he made was that when this destruction was going to take place, the disciples should pray, verse 20 of chapter 24, Matthew 24, verse 20, the disciples should pray that this destruction would not occur in the winter nor on the Sabbath. Very important. Pray that the destruction of Jerusalem would not occur in the winter or on the Sabbath. Note the Sabbath. And so this is one of the passages that many Sabbatarians will use to insist that the seventh-day Sabbath ought to be kept. And the argument is that Jesus was here speaking of the destruction of the temple, which would occur AD 70. And yet he spoke of it not occurring on the Sabbath, meaning that Christians would have been keeping the Sabbath up until then. So the argument, here's a clear text, that at least 40 years after the death and resurrection and ascension of Jesus, Christians were still keeping the Sabbath. And so they conclude that we today should still keep the Sabbath. Now, it is true that Matthew chapter 24 verse 20 is identifying that Christians kept the Sabbath AD 70. Up until AD 70, Christians were keeping the Sabbath. However, there's another point to take note of. Very important. When we look at this parallel passage in Mark chapter 13 and the specific verse that speaks to, the destruction not occurring Pray that your flight may not be in winter on the Sabbath day. In Mark 13, verse 18, it doesn't mention the Sabbath. In Mark 13, verse 18, it just says, and pray that your flight may not be in winter. Full stop. What is happening here? When we examine Matthew by itself and we examine Mark by itself, we understand what was actually taking place. You see, Matthew, when he wrote to a particular community of believers. He sent his document to a particular group of Christians. Those Christians were mainly Jewish Christians. And so, in that community, those set of Christians were keeping the Sabbath. And so here, Jesus in Matthew is portrayed as mentioning the Sabbath because Matthew was written to a predominantly Jewish set of Christians, and they were still keeping the Sabbath. And so Matthew mentions the Sabbath. However, Mark was writing to a different set of Christians from Matthew. So Matthew was writing to one set of Christians, Jewish Christians. Mark was writing to a different set. Mark was writing to a set of Christians that comprised mainly of Gentiles. And in that community, those Gentile believers did not keep the Sabbath. And as such, Mark, in Mark 13, verse 18, does not mention the Sabbath. Jesus in Mark 13, verse 18, does not mention the Sabbath. No, this is very significant. We could not have come to this if we had tried to harmonize the passages, because indeed that's not the original intent. And so what do we have here? We have at least two different communities of Christians. One kept the Sabbath, to which Matthew wrote. Another set, Gentile Christians, did not keep the Sabbath. And so Mark does not mention the Sabbath. And so what we see happening was that during the days of the apostles, the apostolic church, that the church did not keep the Sabbath full scale. In other words, the Sabbath was not kept by every single Christian, every single community. Some Christians kept the Sabbath, while another set of Christians did not keep the Sabbath. And so that has implications even for us today. Because if during the apostolic times, some Christian communities kept the Sabbath while others did not, what that is showing is that the seventh-day Sabbath was not mandatory. It was not obligatory. And so for us today, what that simply means is that if a Christian or a particular group of Christians want to keep the Sabbath, like those who did in Matthew's community, God be praised. But if another Christian or another group of Christians decide that they don't want to keep the seventh-day Sabbath, like those in Mark's community, God be praised, because the Sabbath was not obligatory. It was not mandatory. During the apostolic church, the Sabbath was not kept by every single Christian, by every church community. And this is seen clearly by the Sabbath being mentioned here in Matthew 24:20, but it not being mentioned in Mark 13, verse 18. And so again, we get this correct interpretation because we followed the very important principle of not harmonizing the Gospels. Please leave a comment on this video. Let me know your thoughts on this video. Very important. And I invite you to come and share with us in our worship. You can come down to our physical location, 66A Brunswick Avenue in Spanish Town, Jamaica, and come and worship with us here at the Kayoma Ministries International. We worship on Saturdays, 10:30 a.m. And if you cannot come to our physical location, you can join us on Zoom at the same time, Saturdays, 10:30 a.m. The Zoom link will be provided on Dr. Clinton Baldwin's Facebook page. And if for some reason you can't join us on Zoom or come to our physical location, you can also watch us on Facebook Live. And so I invite you to join us this Saturday. And remember, let us continue to study the Word of God. And as we approach the Word of God to seek to understand it correctly, let us approach the Word with an open mind and an open Bible. God bless you.